I worked on the TV show Wild Bill Hickok for 7 years. Yes. And Andy Devine as well. Also, before the TV show, I made 15 full-length movies. Guy Madison, an icon of Hollywood's golden age, dropped a news that would change the way we think about the city's past before he died. Madison was the perfect leading man. He was known for his rough charm and his part as Wild Bill Hickok. Tall, good-looking, and interesting. Madison seemed perfect on the outside, but he had a secret life that he only told people about in his later years. He had been quiet about his relationships with other guys for decades. Relationships that no one else knew about. At a time when Hollywood not only looked down on homosexuality but actively tried to hide it, these secret relationships were not only personal, they were a way to stay alive. When Madison's career took off, he had to work even harder to hide who he really was. But right before he died, he did something brave. He told the truth about some of the most famous stars he had worked with. Many of them were also living in the shadows. Some people were shocked by the news, while others saw it as confirmation of what they had been thinking for years. But why did Madison decide to speak out now, near the end of his life? It turned out that the truth was much more complicated and broad than anyone thought. Guy Madison's problems, his time in the military, and his big break as Wild Bill Hickok. Guy Madison was born in Pumpkin Center, California, on January 19, 1922. This small town is just as important to his past as the big cities he would later live in. Madison grew up in a simple home that wasn't near the bright lights of Hollywood. His folks and the small town where he grew up didn't exactly set him up for a life as a movie star. But Madison had a strong drive and desire from a very young age. These were traits that would shape his life later on. Madison developed his love of sports and the outdoors while growing up in California. This would later help him get famous for playing tough, manly characters in westerns and action movies. He wasn't just the good-looking star. Madison was different from other people because of how he looked. For young guys all over the country in the early 1940s, World War II was hard. Madison was no different. He went to the University of California, Berkeley, to start his college career. But as the war got worse, Madison, like many of his friends, decided to join the army. He didn't stay at Berkeley for long because he joined the U.S. Army during World War II, which would shape him into the man he would become. When Madison was in the army during the war, it changed the parts he would play later on. As part of his job, he was able to travel and see the world, which changed his view of life and opened up new possibilities for him. Madison came back home after the war, but he was not at all the same person who had left to fight. Things were changing in Hollywood after World War II. A new group of players was starting to show up, and the business was looking for new people to join. Guy Madison had a big change after the war. Madison chose to become an actor when he got back to normal life. This choice led him to the bright lights of Hollywood. In the late 1940s, Madison moved to Hollywood to make the most of his good looks and experience in the service. It wasn't as easy for him to get into the business at first as he had hoped. Competition was tough, and chances were few and far between. At first, it was hard for Madison to get big roles. He usually got small parts or was cast in movies that didn't give him much to do. He wasn't the star he would become, and it wasn't clear if he could stand out from the other young artists who were all in it for the same thing. But Madison didn't give up, and it paid off. In the late 1940s, he made a deal with Warner Brothers, which was a big company at the time. This was a big step for Madison because it was the first time he had a real deal with a company. This gave him the support and attention he needed. Even with this boost, though, his first few years at Warner Brothers weren't easy. Even though the contract gave him some security, it didn't lead to big jobs right away. Madison was still having a hard time getting ahead in Hollywood. At this point, Madison's chance of becoming famous was not at all certain. He had to deal with things that many artists in Hollywood do, being turned down, being disappointed, and playing a string of forgettable parts. People did notice his natural charm and screen personality, though. He got off to a slow start at Warner Brothers, but it was there that he built his portfolio, gained experience, and most importantly, caught the eyes of directors who would later help him launch his career. It wasn't all good times for Guy Madison when he was signed with Warner Brothers. Like a lot of young actors in the late 1940s, he had to work his way up in an industry that usually preferred stars who were already well known. He had a lot of small parts early in his career, some of which didn't show off his full potential. You might think that getting a contract with a big company would make an actor famous right away, but the truth was much harder to see. Madison was one of many actors who had to prove themselves over and over again before they could get the kinds of parts that would make them famous. Warner Brothers' bigger names often stole the show from Madison's early parts. It was hard for him to know what his future held in Hollywood after starring in a string of movies that didn't do very well. As Madison did, it was normal for actors in her situation to give up. There was a lot of competition, and there was always pressure to do well. But Madison's resolve and drive kept him going, even when things went wrong or he was frustrated. At that time, one of the hardest things about getting into Hollywood was that actors didn't have much power over their careers. Many stars had strict contracts with studios in the late 1940s. This meant they often didn't have much say over the parts they played. Madison always had trouble with this lack of creative freedom. He had to work around a system that didn't always see his promise, even though he was good-looking and smart. He has been married, had affairs, and had Hollywood shine a light on his personal life. Guy Madison's rise to fame in Hollywood was truly amazing. Over the course of many years of struggling in small parts, he finally became famous for playing Wild Bill Hickok on the hit TV show Wild Bill Hickok. The story wasn't just about his job, though. His personal life and relationships were also in the news a lot of the time, often more than his work achievements. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Madison's image as a playboy became a big part of how people saw him. His personal life often got more attention from the media than his acting job because he was in relationships with several women. A Hollywood star's life was certainly exciting, but it also had its share of problems, especially when it came to balancing the demands of a job with the allure of love and the attention of the public. Madison got married 3 times. Each marriage had its own story of love, heartbreak, and sometimes shame in public. He may have been best known for his first marriage to actress Gail Russell. They met while working on the movie The Night of the Grizzly, in 1966. At the same time, Russell was having her own problems in Hollywood. Madison's marriage brought her some happiness, but it also had some problems, like the stress of being in the public eye as a famous pair. Russell was known to have weak mental health, and their relationship had a lot of problems. In a way, Madison's personal life was shaped by how hard his job was and how hard his relationships were on him. Even though they got a divorce, Madison will always remember the time they spent together as a special part of her life. After the end of his first marriage, Madison got married again. Unfortunately, not as much is known about this connection because it wasn't as public as his first one. The name of his second wife is still a bit of a mystery. She wasn't as well known as Madison or his first wife. He did get divorced, though, just like in his first marriage. Even though Madison's second romance wasn't as public, it still added to the story of his personal life, which kept people interested. Finally, Madison's third marriage was to Patricia Hardy, who used to be an actor and model. She had her own job in Hollywood, but Patricia wasn't as well known as her husband. It looked like they were able to make their personal lives stable after Madison's previous relationships. They had kids together, and Madison seemed to be having a calmer, more settled life for a while. But even this marriage had some problems. And they ended up getting a divorce as well. Madison's image as a playboy followed him through all of these relationships. People were very interested in his love life, almost as much as they were in his work. His affairs and relationships were often written about in tabloids. At times, it seemed like his personal relationships were getting more attention than his work, and the stress of having to balance his personal and business lives must have been hard on him. Even though his personal life was full of problems, Madison was able to keep up a successful job in Hollywood. He stayed famous in both movies and TV shows thanks to his rugged good looks and charismatic screen presence. His personal problems and professional success were, however, hard to balance, and the public often seemed more interested in his love life than in his acts. In addition to his marriages, Madison's relationships with different women were often the talk of the town. Everyone who saw Madison was interested in him because he was a famous person. The press followed him everywhere. People were always looking at his love life, which made it hard for him to focus on his work. His good looks and charm made sure that women always wanted to be with him. But the constant push to live up to the playboy image probably hurt his sense of who he was, both on and off screen. From the Wild Bill Hickok to a Western star in Hollywood. Guy Madison became one of the most famous Western stars of his time by the early 1950s, when he became a familiar face on TV. What made him famous was his part in the 1951 premiere of the famous TV show Wild Bill Hickok. It was a huge hit and solidified Madison's status as a leading man in the Western genre. The show ran until 1958. At the time, Wild Bill Hickok was a new show that captured the love of Westerns in the United States. A famous lawman and gunfighter in the Old West, Guy Madison played the lead role of Wild Bill Hickok. He played Wild Bill Hickok with charm and toughness, which made fans like him right away. Madison was great as the main character in Wild Bill Hickok, which was one of the most famous TV shows of the 1950s. He became more well-known in Hollywood thanks to the success of the show, and he also became famous in the Western genre. Madison became a well-known figure in Western culture after his role in Wild Bill Hickok. These three actors, who were often grouped with other famous Western players like James Arnes and Richard Boone, ruled the Western genre on both big and small screens. They are sometimes called the Big Three. Many people thought Madison would be a great fit for the role because of his good looks, strong screen presence, and ability to play both a brave and tough police officer. Many people look up to his figure, Wild Bill Hickok, because he was brave and honest. He is a lasting symbol of the American West. Madison's fame only grew as the 1950s went on. He was able to do more roles in movies and TV shows after becoming famous for his role in Wild Bill Hickok. Madison was in a lot of movies during the 2000s, in addition to his work on the show. His performance in The Night of the Grizzly, a Western released in 1966, was one of his most famous movie roles. It showed that he could easily switch from TV to movies. The movie did well at the box office and gave Madison a chance to try new things as an actress. Moving from TV to the big screen showed how versatile Madison was as an actor, which is something that not all actresses could do well. A lot of TV stars had trouble making the transition to movies, but Madison had a few parts that did well for him, especially in westerns that let him keep showing off the traits that made him famous, his tough guy, heroic on-screen persona. His part in the 1967 western The Last Challenge made him an even bigger star in the western genre. Madison did well in these roles, but his film career never quite hit the heights of his TV fame. Even though he kept working in TV and movies throughout the 1960s, none of the parts he played after Wild Bill Hickok were as well known as Wild Bill Hickok. Even so, he continued to make important contributions to westerns during this time, and he stayed a reliable figure in the genre. In the 1950s and 1960s, Madison made guest turns on a number of TV shows, in addition to his roles in movies. In those days, two of the most popular western shows were The Virginia and Gunsmoke, and he was in both of them. These guest parts kept Madison in the public eye and showed how well he could play a range of characters. His performances on these shows made him even more famous as a Western star and cemented his place in the history of TV. As the 1960s went on, though, things started to change in both TV and movies. After 10 years of being very famous, the Western genre started to lose its appeal as people became more interested in other types of stories. Some people, like Madison, had built their careers on playing tough, silent characters in westerns, so this change in taste was hard for them. Madison continued to work in movies and TV shows, but his job path wasn't as clear as it had been when Wild Bill Hickok was popular. After Guy Madison's Cold War controversy, Hollywood had a lot of trouble finding types. By the 1960s, Guy Madison's personal life was getting as much attention as his acting job. His fame kept rising through the 1950s and into the 1960s. Madison was a famous actor in Hollywood thanks to his parts in westerns and TV shows, but his life outside of the spotlight was anything but normal. As the 1960s went on, different parts of his personal life would get more attention from the media and the public. At this time, one of the most important problems Madison had to deal with was a political one. During the 1960s, the Cold War reached its peak, with the United States and the Soviet Union at odds with each other more than ever. Because of this unstable situation, Hollywood was full of political accusations. A lot of stars, directors, and writers were said to support communism or have left-wing views. Guy Madison, like many others in his field, was looked at closely because of the people he hung out with. It was never clearly said that Madison was a communist or involved in any politically subversive activities, but he did become the target of rumors because he was friends with people who were more openly communist, willing to support leftist goals. Because he was friends with a few progressive Hollywood people, rumors spread that he might have supported communist ideas, which made sense given the political climate at the time. But there wasn't any strong proof or specific accusations to back up these claims. It is important to remember that Madison was never officially investigated or charged with anything that could have had a long-lasting effect on his job or reputation. Even though these things were said, Madison avoided any real political problems. Some of Madison's contemporaries were blacklisted or had to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. These political scandals did not have a big effect on Madison's job. His professional standing stayed mostly the same. When Madison was in politics, there was a lot of suspicion and paranoia going around him. It's possible that the way he handled these rumors kept his career from getting seriously hurt. But while Madison's personal life may not have been affected by the political fallout that would last for a long time, TYP casting was a bigger problem for his work in the 1960s. By the 1960s, Madison was known for playing strong, brave Western characters, especially as Wild Bill Hickok on the TV show The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok. This casting type was like a sword with two edges. He became famous and well-known because of it, on the one hand. Of course, this made it harder for him to get bigger or more complicated parts in Hollywood. In the 1950s and 1960s, many stars had trouble with being typecast, especially those who were known for a certain type of movie, like westerns. It was often hard for actors who became famous by playing tough, heroic parts to break out of those roles and show their range. Madison saw himself in a certain category as the ultimate Western hero after playing Wild Bill Hickok. As the Western genre lost popularity, it became harder and harder for him to play other types of parts. Some critics pointed out that Madison's fame as a Western star made it harder for him to show how versatile he was. Success in the genre had helped him get ahead in his work, but it also got in the way of his further growth. Madison was thought of as a tough, noble lawman, which made it hard for him to get parts that needed a different personality or more complex character growth. In the end, this typecasting hurt his chances in Hollywood, especially as movies started to explore new styles and show more complex performances. In the 1970s and 1980s, Guy Madison had problems with alcoholism, a falling career, and small parts. Guy Madison was once a huge star in Hollywood, but as the 1970s went on, his career started to fall apart. Things had changed in the business, and people were no longer interested in the kinds of roles that made him popular. Some of Madison's most famous and well-known work was in the Western genre, but it was starting to lose its appeal as new styles came into fashion in both movies and TV shows. During this time in his life, he would try to move into different types of music and have problems at work that would finally overshadow the successes of his earlier years. Madison's playing career lost some of the steam it had once had in the 1970s. Many people liked him as a leading guy in westerns, especially after movies like The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, but people stopped wanting to watch as many westerns. Hollywood was focusing more on gritty, realistic dramas and the rise of new stars, which made it hard for Madison to find parts that were important. Several times he tried to change the focus of his work, but mostly failed. People used to think that his Western performance was legendary, but now it didn't seem to fit with how people like movies these days. Madison did try his hand at other types of music, though, in the hopes of reviving his career in a field that was changing. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get away from the image that made him famous as Wild Bill Hickok. He tried to move into different types of writing, like action or drama, but it didn't work out as well as he had thought. He still had a hard time getting more diverse parts because he was usually cast as a Western hero. Many reviewers and fans still saw him through the lens of his earlier work, which made it harder for him to try new things in Hollywood. In addition to problems at work, Madison was also having domestic problems at this time. He started having problems in his personal life and then in his work life as well because of his drinking. Unfortunately, these problems were never generally talked about in the 1970s, but they did hurt his career. Like many actors of his time, Madison's mental health was affected by the stress of his failing business and personal disappointments. He turned to alcohol as a way to deal with these things. At the time, these problems weren't talked about much, but they would later become part of his personal story, which helped him hide from the public. In the 1970s and 1980s, Madison wasn't completely missing from the entertainment world, but his appearances were rare and not as well known as they had been in the past. During this time, one of the few parts that stood out was a guest appearance on the popular TV show The Rockford Files. This was a far cry from the westerns that had made him famous in the past. His short turn on The Rockford Files was one of the few times he was on TV, but it wasn't enough to get his career going again. Madison had become less well-known after the success of the show, which showed how far he had fallen from his once iconic position. In the 1970s and 1980s, Madison's fame as a TV and movie star was a thing of the past. In his younger years, he was praised as one of Hollywood's leading men, but by this point, he was stuck in small parts that didn't make an effect. The Western star era was mostly over as the movie and TV industries went on to new things. Fans still liked what Madison brought to the genre, but it wasn't enough to keep his job going in an entertainment industry that was changing so quickly. Guy Madison's hidden gay relationships, letting everyone know the truth before he died. In the old days of Hollywood, it was all about glitz, fame, and privacy for many stars. Many of the biggest names in the business lived in fear for decades that their private lives, especially their sexualities, would be made public. Guy Madison was one of these stars. He was a popular Western TV hero whose private life was kept very hidden when he was at the height of his fame. In a famous autobiography that came out after he died, Madison said that even though he was seen as a straight playboy by most, he had been seeing several famous gay stars of his time, such as Ramon Navarro, Tyrone Power, Anthony Perkins, and Rock Hudson. The book that Madison wrote, which was found many years after he died, shows a new side of his life that was complicated and often painful. People liked him for his part as Wild Bill Hickok in the TV show The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, but in his personal life, he was very secretive and going through a lot of emotional turmoil because Hollywood at the time didn't accept gay people. The memoir shows the secret relationships he had with these famous actors. Many of them also lived in the shadows of their public personas because they had to keep up a certain image of being straight and masculine for their jobs. Madison felt burdened by keeping these relationships secret, but it also showed what life was like in Hollywood in the middle of the 20th century. People thought that being gay was wrong, especially for guys in Hollywood, and that it would ruin their careers. It's possible for someone like Madison, who had made a name for himself as the tough, straight-laced hero on TV, to lose their job if they were found out. Madison later wrote in his autobiography that hiding his name was very hard on him emotionally. One of the most interesting things about Madison's admissions was how much he suffered from keeping things from people his whole life. "I never really had the freedom to be myself," Madison said when he was honest about the problems he was having inside. Madison said, "Every time I got close to someone, I had to think about what would happen. There was a constant fear in my heart that if the truth came out, it would end everything I had worked for." Many of his Hollywood peers felt the same way about their feelings. Madison said that Ramon Navarro, Tyrone Power, Anthony Perkins, and Rock Hudson were in his inner circle. All of these actors were sexually harassed by the entertainment business. In their time, these guys were very famous, but they all had problems with their sexuality. They were aware that being seen could cause a PR disaster that could ruin their lives. Ramon Novarro was one of the first Hollywood stars to come out as gay, but he famously kept his sexuality a secret from everyone. A lot of his private life was only made public after he died. During his talks with Madison, Navarro told her about how dangerous it is to live two lives at once. "I need to be careful about who I trust." Madison was once told by Navarro, "If word got out, it would destroy me." Navarro, like many others in the business at the time, had trouble with his identity because he always walked a fine line between his public persona and his private life. Additionally, Rock Hudson, one of Hollywood's biggest heartthrobs, was also a secret gay man who felt a lot of pressure to keep up the appearance of being straight. Hudson's friendship with Madison was one of mutual support. Both men knew how hard it was to balance their public and private lives. Madison wrote about Rock and his friendship in his autobiography. "Rock and I used to joke that we were better at keeping secrets than the CIA," he said. "But the stress of having to hide who they really were left scars that will never go away." Hudson finally coming out to the world about being gay not long before he died. This was a turning point in how Hollywood views LGBTQ+ people. Anthony Perkins, who was famous for playing the classic roles of Norman Bates and Psycho, also went through the same things. The public didn't know who Perkins really was, but he was known to have dated both men and women in his personal life. Perkins and Madison became friends because they both knew how hard it was to deal with stress in their daily lives. It was common for Perkins to worry that his relationships would be found out. He told Madison, "You can't trust anyone. I keep everything under wraps because one slip up and it's over." Tyrone Power, another famous leading man, was known for his good looks and charm, but his relationships with men were also kept a secret. Power and Madison's relationship was more than just physical. It helped them deal with the loneliness and fear that came with living secret lives. Power's worries about being found out were echoed in Madison's memoir, which said that even though they were friends, they could never be open about their relationship. Madison said, "There were always eyes watching. We were never allowed to be free." Keeping such an important part of his identity secret was hard on Madison and many other stars of his time. The public saw these men as successful and beautiful actors, but they were often locked up emotionally. For Madison, concealing such an important part of his identity was exhausting. "I felt like I was living two lives," Madison wrote in his memoir. Keeping those two lives separate was never easy, it was draining. Hollywood studios did a lot to keep homosexuality a secret. At that time, most actors had to sign morality clauses that said they wouldn't talk about their personal lives or relationships on set. These clauses were like contracts that said how an actor had to act in public and in private. If an actor broke these clauses, especially by being openly gay, they could lose their job, get fined, or face other serious problems. The fear of being publicly outed wasn't just about feeling bad about themselves, it was also about staying in the business. In order to keep their careers, many actors, including Madison, had to hide their relationships with other gay men. In his memoir, Madison was honest about how the pressure to fit in with Hollywood norms caused him to struggle. "We were told what to say, who to love, and how to present ourselves to the world. And if you didn't follow the rules, you were out." The fear of being found out hung over him like a heavy cloud. Even though he had strong feelings for these men, Madison knew that the public would never accept their relationships. It was hard on his emotions to hide everything all the time and know that if the truth ever came out, their careers would be in danger.